Well, hey there, welcome to our channel of... Today we will be concerning ourselves on a topic that has been highly debated on, with no real progress derived from either side, with both sides having arguments that are sound and worthy of being heard of from the other side. Abortion. Let me be your loving mediator between these two sides, as I, a man who will never personally have to consider getting this procedure done for himself, ask today's polarizing question: is abortion ever okay? Or rather, is having an abortion the morally acceptable action to take? First off, when does life actually begin? Well, that really depends on your definition of life. And there are two commonly used definitions, which thankfully are not from Merriam-Webster because them duckers decided to take it upon themselves to answer the question, what is the meaning of life, and come up with a ridiculous 24 different definitions. And you know that they made it way too complicated whenever they used words like beans and vinegar as synonyms for life. Yo dog, what's the meaning of life? The name's Merriam, and I got the answer. 42? It's 42, right? Or is it to love? To reproduce? To seek truth? Nah dog, it's beans. The meaning of life is beans. Whoa man, that's like so deep! And the beans make you gassy. So the meaning of life is also gassy. Yo bro, how did you know? Are you like Rene Descartes incarnate? Know what? The meaning of life is gas too, man. Wow. Just leave, man. Just go. Rene Descartes incarnate strikes again. The meaning of life is also go. So if I go, I will have found meaning to my life. Radical. So the simplified, not Merriam-Webster definition, as derived from the more reasonable Google search engine, provides these two definitions. And the first definition, which I put over here on the right, is the condition that distinguishes animals and plants from inorganic matter, including the capacity for growth, reproduction, functional activity, and continual change preceding death. And the second definition, which I put over here on the left, is the existence of an individual human being or animal. So to bring these definitions for what is considered to be the beginning of personhood, those on the right stick to the first definition and state that at conception, after the cell made its first reproductive division, that is whenever human life starts. It attempts to bring an objective fact that even supracellular human life is precious and important to the development of human life. And the second definition is what those on the left tend to adhere to, bringing to the same table the argument that since an embryo cannot survive apart from its mother until 20 weeks at the very earliest, that the embryo is not yet an individual human. A stance liberals take is that assuming that there is a case for a morally sound abortion, embryos could be aborted up until the limit of viability. And the limit of viability is the gestational age where a prematurely born fetus has a 50% chance of living outside of its mother's womb. With current medical technologies, the current limit of viability is a 24-week gestation. So therefore, abortions that happen after a 24-week gestation are pretty much non-existent, and they're even very rare after a 20-week gestation. When does a person become a person? At conception? At the first heartbeat at 8 weeks? At 20 weeks? 24 weeks? At birth? Or at the unknown time when the fetus will definitely survive outside of its mother's womb? You know what, since this is a balanced show, at least we try to be, I'm going to lay down a couple of concerns that I have to the far right, and then give a couple of concerns that I have to the far left. And to the right I say, if an abortion is absolutely never okay, why do you also want birth control to be so hard to get? Logic with me here for a minute. The problem here is unwanted babies, right? Not everybody is as holy as thou art, but if you think having birth control harder to get will stop unholy sinners from blinking each other's love holes, you are highly mistaken. In fact, birth control should be your first line of defense whenever fighting against abortion, which would essentially prevent the unwanted pregnancies from happening in the first place. I'm glad that you guys are advocating for life. Like, really I am. And I'm with you there. But you shouldn't have such a hard boner for life that you'll let babies be born in ways that are against the woman's wishes. So let's just imagine for a moment what would happen if everything just suddenly became the way that the far right wants them to go. Poof! Nobody ever got an abortion. All forms of birth control are highly regulated and doctor prescribed. And 100% of the children who would have otherwise been aborted went into the adoptive agency's foster care system. Well, currently, the rate of abortions globally for reproductive aged women are about 35 out of 1,000 per year, and as low as 17 out of 1,000 in North America. So since we're doing this for conservatives, we'll use the conservative amount and say that 17 out of 1,000 women who would have gotten abortions will instead have their children go into the foster care system. So that's a little over 1 million babies being injected into the American foster care system every year. And just for conservatism's sake, we'll assume that these people who have gotten abortions, if they hadn't have gotten an abortion, they would still have natural abortions, aka miscarriages, instead, at a normal rate. And the natural rate of natural miscarriages is about 20%. And even with all these conservative assumptions, that would still leave 800,000 babies being put into the American foster care system every year. Plus, this bare minimum number doesn't even assume that the amount of unwanted babies would skyrocket as a result of hard-to-get birth control. Alright, let's compare this to the amount of kids already in the foster care system, and Mother of Yahweh! It is about half that at 428,000. So yeah, let's just go ahead and triple the amount of kids in the foster care system and call it good, right? Except that only about 135,000 adoptions happen per year in the United States. We would need to triple the amount of people willing to adopt a child just to keep up with the supply rates that we currently have. And sextuple the amount of people who are willing to adopt just to prevent children from staying in the system for longer than 2 years. Granted, newborn children are considered more desirable in the adoptive market, since many people looking to adopt are couples that want to conceive themselves, but they cannot, thereby wanting to experience as close to a full helping of growing a child that they could possibly experience. But assuming that we could suddenly triple the amount of babies that we are putting into the foster care system, and assuming that big bass foster homes won't start popping up as a result of these decisions, is just illogical as duck. But I digress from the right, and to the left I say, if abortion is always a woman's choice, what exactly protects good and decent men to have their child whenever the woman doesn't want it? I know it's usually the other way around, the man pressuring the woman to get an abortion. But what if the roles are flipped? And currently in America, the woman has the upper hand in either case. And for the woman, all it takes for her to either get an abortion or not get an abortion is to make the choice herself. But let's give a horrible example that will hopefully never happen. But kinda? Imagine that you get impregnated by my magically blessed sperm, and you alone choose that you don't want it, but I do. You could, in essence, be a total bitch to me, abort the child, and leave me in emotional shambles for losing what would have been my first child. And honestly, I as a man have no legal protection to prevent you from doing that. It is only my trust in you that protects my sanity. Okay, look, I know that the woman is essentially 100% responsible for the growth of the child. I know that she has the most to lose and the most to gain out of her reproductive choices. But is it really that much to ask the to-be father to give his permission to the procedure as well? And you know what, we'll even take it one step back. If the woman is married, her spouse's consent. And if the woman is under the age of her state's adulthood, her legal guardian. Countries including Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Turkey, Morocco, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates all have laws similar to what I am proposing. And these conditions may be bypassed if there is reasonable concern for the mom's health. Yet in the United States, for some reason, these laws have been deemed unconstitutional, making even spousal awareness as a prerequisite a non-thing in the 1992 case study of Planned Parenthood versus Casey. If judges on the panel are allowed to dissent, I think a vocal dissent from myself will positively add to the discussion. I believe philosopher George W. Harris said it best when he wrote that, if a man impregnates a woman with the explicit goal of having a child in a manner that is mutually consensual, then it would be morally unacceptable for that woman to later have an abortion. Therefore, is it wrong for me to ask that a morally unacceptable action have legal consequences as well? It wouldn't even be that hard to put these protections in place. Just require abortion clinics to ask these following questions. 1. How old are you? 2. Were you impregnated consensually? And 3. Are you married? If they are under the legal adult age, the legal guardian should be informed on this matter. Secrets like this should not be hidden from one's legal guardian. And if they are an adult, but they have claimed to have been raped, then no further questions need to be asked. So if they are an adult, they were impregnated consensually, and they are married, they should require their spouse's awareness of the situation, where they could talk it out, like a married couple. That's all I have to say about that. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Now let's move on to what has been observed to be some of the personal consequences of abortion when it's chosen by the woman. Let's just take a look-see at a meta-analysis that examined and combined results from 22 different studies published between 1995 and 2009 and had data on over 877,000 women from 6 different countries. And out of the 22 studies, 21 of them revealed higher rates of mental health problems in women who had undergone abortion. Using a standardized statistical technique for combining the results of multiple studies, the meta-analysis observed that women with a history of abortion faced higher rates of anxiety, which were 34% higher, depression, which was 37% higher, heavier alcohol use, which was 110% higher, heavier marijuana use, which was 230% higher, and higher rates of suicidal behavior, which was 155% higher, with the meta-average of all of these tested variables being 81% higher. Researchers in Finland have identified a strong statistical association between abortion and completed suicide in a records-based study. They found that the annual average suicide rate among all women was 11.3 out of 100,000, but the rate for women following abortion was 34.7 out of 100,000, which is about 3 times higher. And now that we have some of the meta-analysis data covered, let's bring some depth to the first and only counter notion that I saw published by the New York Times. At the very beginning of the article it says this: a new study found that women who had abortions did not experience more negative psychological effects than those who were turned away from clinics. This study already proves to mean jack shiznit to their effort to debunk the meta-analysis claims. It is not the normal population or the control group that is being tested against. It is being tested against those who were turned away from clinics, which automatically suggests that they were already pregnant and were actively seeking abortions, which is not part of the normal population. So to reiterate their stupidity, let's take a look at another segment. Now, a new study, considered to be the most rigorous to look at the question in the United States, undermines that claim that abortions cause mental health problems. Researchers followed nearly 1,000 women. Wow! Only 1,000 women undermined the claims of a meta-analysis that followed 877,000 women. Try again, bitch! Who sought abortions nationwide for 5 years and found that those who had the procedure did not experience more depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, or dissatisfaction with life than those who were denied it. Yeah, what woman after being denied an abortion from one place up and goes, oh well? Yeah, them bitches probably got an abortion from somewhere else. Which they actually admit later on in the article when they say, but their distress was short-lived whether they went elsewhere for an abortion or delivered the baby. After 6 months of being turned away from the first abortion clinic, their mental health resembled that of women who were not turned away and had abortions. Yeah, no shiz, Sherlock. You literally compared women who had abortions in one clinic to women who had abortions in another clinic. Of course their mental health shows no differences! Way to go! Okay, rant over. Science and reason wins over biased journalists. Next. Okay, we discussed the personal consequences, but what about the consequences of a society that allows and normalizes abortion? Well, for one, abortion tends to be safer where it is legal than it is in more legally restrictive and illegal areas. And it also tends to be safer in countries with more money. Since the year 2000, in 28 countries where abortion laws have changed, all but one of those countries did it to expand the legal grounds, to allow abortions to protect a woman's health, for socioeconomic reasons, or without restriction as to reason. In 24 of these cases, laws were issued to cover at least one of 3 additional areas. To be legally able to get an abortion in cases of rape, in cases of incest, or in cases where the fetus is diagnosed with a grave anomaly. We'll bring this up again near the end of the video. But now let's talk about the correlation that appears to happen between legalized abortion and crime. If you have not seen the movie Freakonomics, you probably don't know that there is a correlation between crime rate and abortion. And rather than me go into detail about their findings, I would rather you pause this video and click this link to watch the Freakonomics clip in question. Then I want you to come back to the Notion as I bring up a couple insights that I have on the subject. Return to video countdown, 3, 2, 1. However, one problem that may come up with these assertions is age. In the 1990s, crime rate didn't just go down for people who were born 1973 and later. Crime went down among a bunch of age groups at once. And even though there is evidence to show that youth crime rates influences the crime rates of older adults, that doesn't mean that the people who turned 21 in 1994 were powerful enough to suppress crime from people who were a decade older. This could point towards one of the other half of factors briefly mentioned in the video. Another thing is that this theory makes assumptions about abortion that aren't necessarily true. The unspoken assumption about this abortion theory is that abortions necessarily prevent unwanted children, and unwanted children necessarily prevent more crime. And those aren't proven assumptions per se. But if we were to ask women seeking abortions, why are you getting an abortion? Is it really that far of a stretch to infer that their reasoning is because they do not want the child? And if we assume the foster care system is where children who are unwanted by their parents go, then there should be a correlation between foster care children and increased rates of crime. And the correlation from the study I found is significant among male children who went into the foster care system as a teenager. And numerically higher rates of crime did occur in adults who grew up in the foster care system when they were children. So statistically speaking, whenever foster children are equated with unwanted children do tend to commit more crime. Now this doesn't mean that they necessarily will, it just means that they are more likely to. And in regards to these issues, all I say is this. Those assumptions made within Freakonomics should have been addressed more clearly. No scientific method is perfect, but I've got to give props to the creators of Freakonomics. That not addressing the age problem with better precision and explanation is the only problem that I could find with their study. So now I'm just going to quickly address sex-selective abortion. By this point, we should all know that China had a cluster duck of issues with their one-child-only policy that ended in 2015. And combining that policy with a culture that is very, must have male heir, it was inevitable that they would end up with 24 million male heirs with no viable means of producing their next heir, since, most of their female to-be counterparts were aborted. And as a global humanity, why is it that some of us have decided among ourselves that babies that could have some sort of disability or any undesirable trait would be unworthy of life? Like, for example, Dr. Dipshiz over here be saying, "Yo, your baby is up with the Down syndrome. Would you like to abort?" To whom I would say, heck to the gnaw. No parent would actually want Down syndrome for their child. But kinda, if we do end up having a Down syndrome baby, you bet your bass that we will keep it. So no, in my opinion, just because someone is going to be destined to have a hard life doesn't mean you come and swoop in and say, no life. For real, give the child a chance and let it die naturally like the rest of us, no matter how young or old that is. Alright, now it is time to discuss the bottom line. Is abortion ever okay? Well, as far as is defendable by lawmakers, as we mentioned earlier, there are 3 major justifications where it may be justifiable to get an abortion. In cases of rape, incest, and a grave anomaly in the fetus. We already discussed my take on the anomaly bit, but let's just say for a moment that the disorder that the fetus was diagnosed with was absolutely horrible. Like, for example, the child not developing a skin organ. It will probably not last that long outside of the womb, so what's the point of carrying it to term? I don't know, perhaps that is the morally justifiable thing to do, to not let a child suffer with not having a skin organ outside of the protective environment of the womb. But on the other hand, as long as there is life, there is still hope, and who knows? Perhaps doctors will have a skin donor just at the right time, and possibly be able to perform a full skin transplant on the newborn child. As human society develops technologically and medically, it becomes increasingly more likely that these types of cases will be able to be treated as soon as they exit the womb. For the cases of rape immediately justifying abortion, there are actually many examples of people who were conceived in rape and subsequently lived very productive lives in society. Some famous people include abolitionist and author Frederick Douglass, preacher and presidential candidate Jesse Jackson, and Catwoman actress and Santa Baby singer Eartha Kitt. These people lived, they were loved, and by all means, they deserved to live. To truly justify an abortion in this instance, we would have to consider the abortion not as giving the child the death sentence the father more rightfully deserved, but rather as a case of saving the mother from herself. Let me explain. Let's give an obvious worst case scenario. Now this is purely hypothetical, but let's say that a 19-year-old pale white woman gets brutally raped by an older dark black guy whom she is an acquaintance with. A few weeks pass and she's trying to forget about what happened to her, but she can't seem to get his face out of her head. And once she finds out she's pregnant, she feels disgust at the thought of carrying such an oppressive man's child. She thinks forward to the future, trying her best to imagine loving this child, but knows that the child would have such dark skin that she knows that the face of the child whom she is trying to love would be all too similar to the face that had brutally assaulted her. For keeping the child would, in her mind, justify what had happened to her was okay. The mothers of Frederick Douglass, Jesse Jackson, and the like were mentally strong. They pushed forward their love so strongly that it carried over into their child's life. But this woman, this hypothetical pale white 19-year-old, she's crumbling. The disgust that she is currently feeling for her dark-skinned acquaintance would more likely than not carry over to her child. And although the child doesn't deserve it, the mother didn't deserve it in the first place. So who are we to judge for ourselves what the morally right thing for this woman to do is? First empathize rape, then empathize the physical, emotional, and economic struggles that would be forced upon this woman if she was to carry to term. The thing about love is, you cannot force somebody else to love when they themselves have faced hate headlong. Going back to the strong mothers who chose the loving option to not abort, that is just it. They chose to love, in spite of hate's temptation to get rid of the unplanned and initially unwanted pregnancy. I would still implore all women who have conceived to choose love and choose life. And at the very least, carry it until it is born and then give it over to some adoption agency. But if you can't find it in yourself to justify the reproduction of a rapist's DNA, I will not judge you. So in cases of rape, it is your choice. Just choose the path that you think will lead to your best self many years down the line. And for cases of incest, like half of royalty throughout history are products of incest. The only weird thing I'd like to bring up is that the justification I used earlier for aborting rape-conceived fetuses is actually the opposite of what would happen in incestuous conceptions. You'd actually be duplicating your own DNA by 50% in mother-son and father-daughter relationships. And that's kind of the whole idea behind incest. You're propagating your own DNA, to the point of inbreeding and the physical, mental, and reproductive problems that come with it. I'm sure it'll make family reunions difficult for your child, but if the child was conceived in consensual, incestuous love, if there is such a thing, I can't think of a good reason not to keep it, because family peer pressure is not a good reason. But anywho, hopefully now as a result of all this research, you may figure when it is personally morally acceptable to get an abortion, and why it should be socially acceptable to allow that minority to have a safe and legal procedure available to them. This video was made by Tim and Kaida Stabley on a channel called Death of the Notion, and definitely not by people who would get an abortion within the safe confines of our marriage. Because no matter whose or what kind of baby comes out of Kaida's mommy oven, it will be our child. And no, she's not expecting a bastard or alien child right now. If you would like to become more enlightened, depressed, or enraged with us, depending on your previous notions, please do us a giddy and click on those like and subscribe buttons, and join our fellow sea creatures who live in the Notion Ocean. And until next time, kumbaya, motherfuckers. Spare me, spare.